the most affected people in areas, which is also called MAPA with the acronym. My presentation will discuss the way the MAPA discuss their own experience of the climate crisis in international discourse settings. And I drawn the hypothesis that metaphors play an important role in promoting their own views on the climate crisis. So this is a brief overview of the presentation, just for your information. So I will first briefly discuss the social aspects of the climate crisis. Then I will explain my focus on metaphor. I will explain my methodology, and I will present the main strategies used by the MAPA in their climate crisis discourse. And of course, I will end this presentation with further perspectives. Thank you. The social aspects of the climate crisis. So as you know, I will go very, very briefly about this, but this is just a wrap up. So as you know, the climate crisis is a series of events which happen globally and which affect the ecosystem and thus humanity. So in the 1990s, there was a major report, the IPCC report, which demonstrated the human responsibility for the climate crisis. And then this major finding, was further discussed through what is called the North-South divide, which takes into account the fact that the countries in the global North emit a lot more pollution than the countries in the global South, but the countries in the global South suffer a lot more from the impact of the climate crisis. But of course, when you talk about responsibilities, it's not as simple. This is not just a matter of geographical limits between the North and the South. And this is where I discuss the notion of climate justice, which takes into account the fact that, yes, the global South suffers the most from the climate crisis, but also women, people of color, suffer the most from the crisis and are the least responsible for this crisis. So in order to encapsulate all these different, different responsibilities, different percentages of responsibility, so to speak, some climate movements like Greenpeace, Friday for Futures came up with the acronym MAPA to refer to the most affected people and areas. So this leads me to my two research questions. I will actually, yeah, thank you. So considering these different experiences, how do the MAPA share their own experience and knowledge of the crisis in international discourse settings? And how do they communicate their own viewpoints on the crisis to an international audience who have a very different perception of this crisis? Okay, so to answer these questions, my hypothesis is that metaphors play an important role in expressing one's view on the climate crisis, especially in international discourse settings. And this is for, well, several reasons, as you can see. So the first reason being that metaphors fulfill pedagogical functions. They are usually used in textbooks or at schools by teachers to explain climate science. They fulfill pragmatic functions. That is, of course, if you use a metaphor like climate race or another metaphor like climate war, the public will have a different opinion on the arguments that you are promoting. They fulfill intercultural function, that is, they can help people of different cultures to have a dialogue regarding their own experience of the climate crisis. And they fulfill argumentative function, that is, in international political discourse settings, like the ones I'm going to discuss, the metaphors can help discourse producers to promote arguments related to the need to find solutions and to control the crisis. And of course, these metaphors are particularly interesting to look at and to analyze because existing studies have showed that the misuse of metaphors can actually lead to skepticism and conspiracy theories. Okay, so in order to analyze the metaphor, I built a data set. So this data set comprises different international discourses about the climate crisis, mainly from the conferences of the parties. So the International Climate Summit organized by the United Nations. I gathered 192 texts in which I could identify 73 metaphors. So to analyze metaphor, I paid particular attention to the context, that is the social-political context of these international discourse settings, because, well, the conference of the parties, there are political discourse settings as well, but also the social-political context, which is associated with the discourse producer. And I also look at the arguments derived from the metaphor that are used by the discourse producers. So this research actually relies on the combination of three different metaphor theories, the first one being critical metaphor analysis, which I supplement with argumentation theory in order to identify the discourse producer's goal in using such and such metaphor. I also supplement these argumentative views on metaphor with the notion of resistance to metaphor. That is, I look at the way the MAPA may actually resist the metaphor that are typically used by the Global North speakers. Okay, so this led me to identify three general main strategies in the way the MAPA are using metaphor in international discourse settings. And I will start with the first one, which relates to the need to change international discourse about the climate crisis. So this is a direct reference to the way the MAPA resists the metaphor of the global north. So I will to read. Within this strategy, the MAPA actually drew a distinction between the conceptualization at play in the global north, the conceptualization that they have heard during the conferences of the party, this is distinguished from the conceptualization which is actually at play in their own country, in the global south. So they rely on metaphor to insist on the effects of international discourse on the life of the people in their own countries. So in order to illustrate this strategy, I here quote a brief extract from a speech given by an activist from the Equator during COP26. So he says, "Our peace is destroyed by the criminal organization's control of Northern America over the south side of this rich continent. But when I talk of richness, I talk about the biodiversity and scientific potential that can give us another chance to transform our reality to a sustainable normality." So in this speech, just a bit of context, the activist actually refers to the massive exploitation of the lands which affect the Equator, which is also associated with mass slaughter, discrimination, social crisis, etc., economic crisis as well, to the extent that it has been dubbed the rainforest Chernobyl. So in order to alarm and alert the audience, the international audience, to the effects of this exploitation, Diane Castro relies on a discussion of the concept richness. So he opposes two different conceptualizations. The first one being associated with the common conceptualization in the global north, which relates to the economic purposes of the destruction of the lands. And this is opposed to his own conceptualization, which refers to the non-economic value of the lands for the community in Ecuador. That is, he is actually questioning the fact that the land as goods may be understood as an actual metaphor. So in order to promote his argument, he first endorses the conceptualization of richness, the ones at play in the global north, because he refers to the destruction of the lands as an act of theft through which the global north deprives the community of their own goods. This is followed by a dispute of this pre-existing conceptualization, because the activist promotes a different definition of the concept, which relates to biodiversity and scientific potential, and he thus denies the outcome that the outcome of this exploitation will, in fine, be beneficial to the global north. So this redefinition of richness insists on the value of the environment. International discourse should adapt to the needs and cultures of the most affected people and areas. Richness is here cited as just one example of one word that has different meanings for the global south and the global north. Okay, so this leads me to the second strategy used by the MAPA. So in their discourse, the MAPA use metaphor in order to promote the link between their cultures, their traditions, and their lands. This link is established through eulogistic metaphors that convey beneficial attributes to the ecosystem. The MAPA draw causal relationships between the survival of the lands and the survival of that community. So to illustrate this point, this is an extract from an official statement by the Indigenous People Forum, which was posted during, I think it was COP25, during the COP25 conference. So I quote, "Resource extraction is destroying Mother Earth and poisoning our water. Our forests are the lung of Mother Earth and they bring alive balance and teachings. Resource extraction is extracting our humanity and violating our rights to live sustainably on the land." So here, what we can first notice is that in this statement, the arguments start with the personification of the ecosystem as Mother Earth. And this personification is actually relevant in this particular statement because this directly relates to the mythology of the story of Gaia, the goddess of the earth, the guardian of nature, which has obviously different storylines depending on the different communities mainly in South America. So this reflects an instance of indigenous perspectivism, or what is called perspectivism, which places humanity as a simple component of the more general concept ecosystem. And this is noticeable in the extract because of the repetition of the genitives, or water, or land, etc. So this has different major implications. So the first one being that the destruction of environmental resources is equated with disrespect towards indigenous beliefs. The second implication is that the earth's resources possess sacred powers, and thus they cannot be carelessly exploited for economic purposes. And the third one is that, well, human life depends on Mother Earth's nurturing capacities. And this is all to say that the destruction of the Earth, of the ecosystem, eventually will destroy humanity. What is noticeable in the speeches and discourses from indigenous communities is that they very much focus on the indivisibility of the concept of nature communities. So in the extract, we can notably see that the extraction of the land is equated with the extraction of humanity. So this involves ethical considerations regarding genocides and colonialism, which have long impacted these communities. Okay, so the third strategy used by the MAPA in their discourse is actually a focus on the responsibility of the global North over the countries and the communities of the global South. But quite interestingly, in the speeches that I collected for this project, I could not really find any metaphor that directly, typically blame the global North. Instead, this blame is rather implicit because the MAPA will rather use metaphor to insist on their strengths and skills to overcome the damages that are inflicted by the global North. So to illustrate this strategy, a brief example from a speech by a Maori activist from New Zealand delivered during COP26. So land in my region was stolen by the British Crown in order to extract oil, and suck the land of all its nutrients, and seeking to displace my people and end our practices. In the face of mediocre leadership, indigenous peoples shine through. This is all to say that climate change is the final outcome of the colonial project, and in our response, we must be decolonial. Okay, so this argument starts with the use of an argumentative metonymy by which the activist actually individualizes the colonizer through the metonymy the British Crown. And this aims at showing that colonial practices eventually only benefits a few while they impact many individuals in these communities. This argumentative metonymy is then supplemented by the metaphor, the land as a nutritious edible. This metaphor reflects an argumentative storyline that depicts voracious beings, the British Crown, who steals the community's nutritious edible and returns an impoverished version of this edible. So this use of metonymy complemented with metaphor actually aims at promoting the implicit arguments that these colonial practices have led the population to starvation. This illustrates the long-term impact of colonialism and the lack of global justice. So in this speech, the activist promotes a decolonial response to the climate crisis. She argues against global trade that promotes such practices, and she promotes indigenous knowledge and skills which help them to survive these numerous threats. So here she does not so much ask for the support of international communities, but instead she refers to the history of her community to inform the public about decolonialism, which promotes adapted solutions to the climate crisis. Okay, so I wanted to end this presentation with some further perspectives, which are encapsulated in this, another extract from a speech by Brazilian indigenous activist during COP26. And I wanted to finish with this extract because I think it shows the power of international meetings, political meetings, and international dialogue about the climate crisis. So I quote, "We need a different path and global changes. Indigenous people are at the heart, at the front lines of the climate emergency. Let us end the pollution of hollow words and let us fight for a livable future and present." Another reason why I wanted to end with this precise abstract is that I think that it clearly resonates with the scope of this conference, which is communicating climate hope. Because in fact, in my data set, I don't have, I think I mentioned it a bit earlier, but I don't have a lot of example, actually only one example, that relies on pathos to alarm the international communities about the damages experienced by the MAPA. But instead, the MAPA used metaphor to insist on such damages and to illustrate their strengths and skills in the face of the climate crisis. That is, they promote the fact that they survive and they know how to thrive despite these threats. This argument mainly takes place through the notion of indivisibility between the concept communities, nature, ecosystem. So the MAPA teaches us how to listen to our ecosystem to better identify its needs. And because of their experiences, they are legitimate to speak on behalf of the Earth. Thank you very much for your attention.
We have a couple minutes for questions.
I think I will start. You know how you cannot decide which room is for you and you have this fear of missing out. So after this presentation, I'm not feared anymore. It's been enough for me for this session. It was a great presentation. I have a question regarding my own studies, which was about Tuvalu. So I